Hey, if you're a fan of the Mr. Sleepy channel, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss the weekly uploads. I saw this at night. Back in the mid-'80s, I was camping with my parents and a friend next to the Columbia River in Oregon. It was one of those KOA-type places my mom liked, but pleasant enough given that it wasn't overly crowded while we were there. My friend and I slept in a tent pitched next to the trailer and were up really late one night playing Risk and drinking copious amounts of soda. Both of us had to go to the bathroom and decided to go up to the campus facilities instead of waking my parents by using the trailer toilet. Everyone else in the camp was fast asleep, but it was really noisy out due to all the frogs and crickets. On the walk up, neither of us were talking. And about halfway there, the hair on the back of my neck started to stand up, and I got this weird chilled sensation. My friend stopped and put his arm out to stop me and put his finger to his lips in a gesture to keep quiet. That's when I realized that there was no noise. Anywhere. No frogs. No crickets. Nothing. I had this urge to bolt back to the tent, but it wasn't strong enough to actually get me moving. I looked over to my friend and he was staring up at the sky. I looked up too and didn't realize what I was seeing until the stars started appearing off to my left, slowing appearing from left to right. It was as if something gigantic was in the sky, blotting out the stars. But the way the stars were reappearing, it must have had a straight trailing edge. Imagine yourself holding up a big piece of cardboard above your head at night, moving it from left to right. It felt like that. No lights though, no color, no noise, only the sensation of nothingness slowly moving off to our right. I don't know how long we watched, but by the time the stars had all reappeared up to the tops of the trees over by the river, the frogs and crickets had started to make noise again. We had talked about what we thought it was before falling asleep and decided to keep quiet about it the next day in hopes of hearing someone else in camp talking about it, but heard nothing. We stayed there for a couple more days after that, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. By the way, the weather while we were there was beautiful with no clouds or fog. It still creeps me out to this day, but at the same time fascinates me as to what it might have been. Being followed in the woods. Me, my parents, and my friend were camping at Tuckahoe State Park, and the last night we were staying there was very creepy. Me and my friend were hiking the trails all day, and we thought it would be a good idea to go to the lake to watch the sunset and talk about random things. There was a red car sitting in the parking lot near us, but we didn't see anyone around. This is important to know. It was almost dark out, so we decided to leave, but I had to go to the bathroom. When we got in the bathroom, there were no lights, so it was pitch black. I had to have my friend shine a flashlight. I was washing my hands and this strange alarm started to go off, so me and my friend ran out of there, kinda creeped out. When we did get out of the bathroom, it was dark and we had to walk back into a mile trail back to our campsite. When we walked in the woods, my friend swore she seen a person standing in the near entrance of the path watching us walk onto the trail. The walk seemed so long and dreadful. I had this feeling someone or maybe even something watching us. Not even a few minutes on the trail, I heard fast-moving footsteps and I started to see things out of the corners of my eyes. We decided to call my parents and tell them to hurry and come to the trail we were on. My friend's phone was about to die, and that was the only way we could have a light. After what seemed like ages of having the feeling of someone watching you and following you, we saw flashlights and noticed it was my parents. We ran and started telling them everything, but they didn't believe us. The next day, we were packing up our things, and I looked over, but there was the same red car just a few camping spots down from us. After that, I was ready to get out of there, just knowing that perhaps the same person was just a few spots down from me. Wait, it wasn't you? A few years ago, I went camping for the first time in my life. I was about 11 or 12 when we headed out to a forest nearby our house. We were in Poland for the holidays, as every year, and right next to our house was a huge forest. So one day we decided to take out my mom's old tent she still had from like the 90s and just stay for the night or two in between some wildlife. Good thing, the place we chose to sleep at was only about 20, maybe 30 minutes away from the house. Bad thing, there are a lot, and I mean a lot of wolves, foxes, and boars out in that forest, and honestly I kind of regretted going out there in the first place. We set everything up around 6 p.m. and my sister and I set up the campfire. My dad chopped down a smaller tree earlier with his oak axe, important for later part of the story, and by now it had dried out enough to catch fire. We sat around it for quite some time, probably around 4 hours, until it was dark, so we decided to just head back to sleep then. My two sisters and I on one end of the tent and my parents on the other. It was probably just the fear of getting eaten alive by some wolves or homesickness, but I couldn't sleep at all. I heard my dad tell my mom he was going out into the forest to get some firewood for the morning while it was still fairly dry, or it would have soaked up all the dew by then. The thought of not having my dad around made it even worse for me to even close my eyes for a second. I'm not too good at telling what time it is by just staring at the sky, or trying to figure out how long it has been. So I'll just say it was around 12 or 1 in the morning. I was actually falling asleep when I heard some rattling outside the tent. My first thought, wolf. I was terrified and just popped out my head through the little curtain that separated the two halves of the tent. Basically a piece of thin fabric just hanging on some threads, to see if my dad was back. He was still gone, and it had been about an hour since he went. I lay back down and just tried to fall asleep, but when I turned myself on my side, I saw this faint human shadow outside the tent. I froze and let out a teeny squeak. The person seemed to be holding some sort of axe, shovel type thing in its hand, so I thought it may have just been my dad back. The shadow walked towards the entrance of the tent and just stood there at the zipped-up door for maybe 30 seconds. I began to wonder why he wasn't just coming inside. The person finally ran off into the forest, but dropped the axe. You could hear the footsteps fade in the distance and a thump just appear along the way. Maybe a minute or so later, I hear my dad walking back from the opposite side of the forest and enter the tent all tired and just fell asleep. Seemed kinda sketchy and fishy and scary to me, but it was so late, I couldn't even think anymore and I somehow fell asleep. The next morning, I woke after my dad dropped his phone on his face, letting out an ouch. I peeped through the curtain at him and he just smiled back while rubbing his nose. I needed some fresh air because I was feeling a bit sick. Maybe from the nerves in the morning or homesickness. I couldn't really tell. Both of us got out of the tent and walked around for a while. We circled around the campsite for around 10 minutes until we came back to our tent. That's when I noticed something that ran the chills down my back. A few meters from the tent, in the corner of my eye, I managed to catch a glimpse of something red. It took me a hot second to realize I actually saw something and turned my head to see what it was. It was a red and black rubber axe. It was not there before. I knew it wasn't my dad's because he was by the pile of wood he collected at night. From my dad's reaction, I probably turned pale because he started to freak out a little, like I was about to pass out or something. He turned his gaze to where I was looking, and we both just stared for a few seconds before he called out for the rest of the family to wake up and get moving. We were all packed up within an hour and we rushed back home. I later told my dad what I saw that night and he wouldn't believe me at first. I carried on with the story and he finally realized I was telling the truth. To this day, I still have no clue who the duck that was. But I'm just happy he didn't investigate our tent any further or any other animal out in that forest. Something bad happened while I was camping. I'm not sure what. I'm not sure if I'm in the right place. But I've held this story in for the last 6 years because it sounds crazy and I got told not to talk about it. I went camping 6 years ago with a now ex-boyfriend of mine. The campsite we picked was beautiful. We were able to drive in through some rough trails. The spot we picked was next to some hiking trails that weren't very far from some natural hot springs and a huge waterfall. We were in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely no one was around. We set up camp next to the car, went hiking, soaked in the hot springs, came back and had dinner. It was all very normal until we woke up the next day. I need to give some context as to how we slept that night so you can understand my confusion. Before we went to sleep, I put our food cooler and a stereo that we brought in the car and locked it. I put the keys in the front pocket of my backpack and put the backpack next to my sleeping bag on the far side of the tent away from the door of the tent. My boyfriend at the time slept nearest the door of the tent with a gun next to him. We woke up the next morning and I felt fine. I had slept hard and from inside the tent everything seemed normal. When we got out, our campsite was absolute chaos. The fire pit we had made was ruined. The cooler had been thrown and food was scattered all over the place. The stereo was smashed to pieces laying next to a tree. All the car doors were open, including the trunk. We stood there for a minute in silence just taking everything in. The woods felt off now. It was quiet and not the beautiful campsite that I saw yesterday. Everything about those woods felt wrong now. My ex accused me of not locking the car the night before and that an animal got into our stuff. I promised that I had locked it and went into the tent to grab the keys from my backpack, but they weren't there. I found them later on the ground next to the car. We quickly threw everything in the trunk and left. My boyfriend was quiet and wouldn't talk to me about what had just happened. He finally spoke up and we were almost home and told me that he had a dream the night before about something kneeling over him in the tent holding his gun, just staring at him. When I tried to ask him more questions, he got quiet again and said he didn't want to talk about it and that I shouldn't talk about it anymore either. I've tried to forget about it, but I just can't. Something really wrong happened to us in the woods that night. Guy disturbs us in the middle of nowhere. I'm a 19-year-old female and a 23 male very short, and a friend, 21 female, I know for a couple of years. We went camping earlier in 2020 in a big park, and around 12:30, a kind of drunk-looking old man came up to us on his bike playing policeman, saying that we weren't allowed to stay because we were disturbing the wildlife. He had been arguing with my boyfriend for the past 45 minutes. At that point, I have had enough. He would not leave us alone, and when I walked away from him, he yelled he was going to call the police on me for walking away from him. I was drunk, angry, and tired. If I didn't walk away, I would have probably beaten the guy up, to be honest. I walked away and called the police on him. He was annoying and creepy. We were just about to go to sleep when he came up to us. This is a park in the middle of a city. There is no wildlife other than the homeless people and some sheep here. The police said that they wanted to talk to him, so I walked back and put it on the speaker, and finally, he walked away after the police told him to leave us alone. The police said we were not allowed to be there, but they didn't bother. The policeman on the phone was very nice and understanding. It was my boyfriend and a good friend out in this park in a tent. Imagine a possibly drunk/high old guy coming up to you in the middle of a park in the middle of the night, not leaving you alone. Yes, I called the police. I didn't feel safe. The guy yelled at us for just having a tent on the grass. Forgot to write this at first, but he tried taking a picture of us as some kind of evidence. We didn't want him to take our picture, so he said so. He was still trying to take a picture of us, though. told us that he would stay and look at us till we left. He yelled multiple times that we weren't doing it fast enough. Camping gone wrong. It was mid-November. I had to find a place to camp, but since I was lazy, I decided to wait a week before the actual weekend. A week before the weekend, I decide to call some owners so I can have a place to sleep. As I call many numbers, all of the owners are unavailable or simply not here. But then I see a number which I have never called before. Since it is at the end of the list, I call, and an old lady pick up the phone. I do the basics, presentations and all. She agreed to let me and my team stay at hers, and we are making agreements. The afternoon, I go to her property to check everything such as portable water, the place to put the tent and the campfire. The place is kind of dark, but it's nice. The week passed and Saturday arrives. The Saturday is ending well. We did some great games, we ate a lot, and had a good night show. As they go to sleep in the tent, I stay awake to finish paperwork for the next day. It is now midnight and I decide to go to sleep because we have to wake up early to go to church. As I switch off the flashlight, one of my newbie, we are 8 in total, wants to go to the toilets, aka a tree, and asks me to come with her. I can understand because it's better to be accompanied at night, especially in the woods. So she does her business, and I suddenly hear some noises far away, but not that far. I tell myself it's nothing. It must be some animals trying to find food. We go back to the tent, and that's when I hear footsteps approaching. As I hear those footsteps, I remain calm and tell myself maybe it's the old lady checking if we didn't make the fire too close or something. But I still have an odd feeling because it's midnight, and why would she do this at this hour? Then I hear no more footsteps for about 10 minutes. Then I hear some coming to our tents. Thankfully, all of my girls are sleeping. Because they have been scared. I was the oldest one. They were about 3 or 4 years younger. As I hear footsteps which seem to come from one person, I hear others coming from the back of the tent. And I was like, okay, this is getting weird. I need to do something. I checked the tent by the inside, and thank God, one of my newbies left some embers from the fire, so I could see what happens between the fire and the zip of my tent. A minute passed by, and a silhouette is there just between the fire and my tent. I stopped breathing. I literally froze. I started to move towards my phone when I saw the silhouette coming closer to the zip of the tent. I sent a message to one of my bosses who are always camping in the near areas if something happens. But I know she would take too long, so I had to think of something. And think fast. That's when I had an idea. I put my alarm on like a big siren, because sometimes we would do like night games and wake up in the middle of the night. So I put my bell on and my girls woke up. The silhouette had started to unzip. I actually saw fingers from below. But as the silhouette heard my girls waking up, she or he sprinted back to where he came from. That's when I saw 2 other silhouettes sprinting back in the same direction. Everything ended well. 20 minutes later, my boss came and stayed the night, and I never had to deal with those silhouettes again, thankfully. I witnessed something with a few friends in the woods 9 years ago that haunts me till this day. Me and some of my buddies used to go to this place called Profile Rock in Freetown, Massachusetts. Late at night, sometimes 2 to 3 in the morning. One night during the summer, I go to Profile Rock with 3 of my friends at 2:30 a.m. just to mess about and explore. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but Profile Rock and the area we were in is part of an area called the Bridgewater Triangle, which is the site of alleged paranormal activities and also one of the most haunted areas in the state I live in. Continuing on, we climbed Profile Rock itself, stayed on top of it for maybe 3 to 4 hours, and we all decided to leave. Now, as you're leaving Profile Rock, you have to go down this long path that's about 2 miles long to get back to where we parked our car. Two of my friends are walking about 20 to 30 feet in front of me and my other friend. Now I'll never know why I turned around. I didn't have a feeling like someone was watching us. I just simply turned around because besides the moonlight shining through the trees in certain areas, we only had cell phone flashlights to make our way around. I remember turning around and seeing someone running at us from about 150 feet away full speed. What threw me off wasn't that they were running at us, it was how they were running. You know how a zombie walks in a horror movie dragging one of its legs almost limping? That's how this someone was running at us. At first, I didn't say anything and possibly assumed it was one of my friends or someone that was already in there who got injured and needed assistance, until this someone made it to an area of the path where the moonlight reached through the trees and gave them some perspective. What I saw still chokes me up to this day. You ever see a child try to draw a person? How they make a stick figure most of the time? That's exactly how this someone looked. I caught maybe a 10-second glance as it was running under the moonlit trees, but I saw no distinguishable facial features. No eyes, no mouth, and no ears. Its arms and legs looked like that of an extremely malnourished person, only completely black, and it didn't look like skin or any type of clothing from what I could see. I almost can't even describe it, to be honest, and you could blatantly tell it wasn't a mask or one of those Halloween blacked out suits. I recall calling out to my friend in a panicked voice, who was walking with me, who is now maybe 10 feet ahead of myself. I shined my cell phone light on him as he was looking where I was just looking, and I could tell right away from his facial expression that I wasn't seeing things. It was now maybe 40 feet away from us, if that, almost the same distance as our friends in front of us, and me and my friend just took flight and started running. My other friends in front of us shot around and asked what was wrong, and I replied, "Just run." And all four of us jetted for our car. I remember taking a glance back as we were running, and there was nothing there, even though whatever was chasing us would certainly be on our tails by now. We all hopped in the car, and my friend who was walking with me yells, "Dude, tell me you saw that. What the fuck was that?" I told him I seen the same thing. I asked him to describe to all of us what he saw, and he described literally the exact same thing I witnessed. By now, my other two friends are thinking we were joking around or messing with them, until my friend who was walking with me swore on his father, who has passed away not even a month ago, that he's telling the truth. I was kind of frustrated, to be honest, because I couldn't believe my other two friends didn't see it as they turned around to question why we were running, but it doesn't matter now. We actually went back there with a few more people the day after and witnessed nothing, of course. I'll never know what it was or who it was or what it wanted. But I know one thing, there's no way in hell two people both imagined seeing some stick figure specter in the woods. Something strange that I still think back on. When my cousin and I were younger, we spent a great deal of time together. We would get into all sorts of mischief, as boys do. I was staying over at my aunt and uncle's visiting my cousin one weekend when we came across something that, at the time, we didn't think to bring up to anyone older and smarter than we were. We live in South Carolina for what that's worth, and we were around the age of 12 and 8, me being the older of the two. The area around my aunt and uncle's house has some small, densely wooded areas. But overall, the area isn't anything I'd consider rural. We decided to explore an area of woods across from my aunt and uncle's house, a spot we hadn't really explored much of. Not too far from the road, we came across an old house. It wasn't in bad shape, and even had a little garden with a well enough tended flower bed. Our first thought was, reasonably enough, that we'd run into someone's yard. Passing through, We noticed one of the windows to the home was broken, so decided to peek inside. There wasn't much of anything in the house. It was devoid of furniture or anything else that would imply that someone actually lived there. Naturally, we tried the doors to see if we could get in. No luck. We then heard a car pulling up to the house from the opposite side to us. My cousin and I darted for the tree line and followed some power lines into the nearby woods. A large section of the woods here had been cleared out to allow for the power lines to be where they were. So picture a clearing of around 100 or so feet surrounded by woods on either side. After following the power lines for quite a bit, we got hit by an unmistakable smell of something dead. We kept on and noticed a wooden tower stand off the side through the woods a bit. We excitedly hurried to investigate it. On the way, we found a dead dog. That would explain the smell. Nothing too unusual. Then we found another, and another. Surrounding the entire stand were the corpses of dead dogs. It had to be over 30 carcasses. They were all in varying states of decay. Some seemed only a few days old. Some were nothing but bones. We were alarmed, but still dumb kids and wanted to climb to the top. So we did. At the top, we found even more dog carcasses. So process this. Not only were there bodies of dead dogs surrounding this tower stand, someone put forth the effort to drag them some 30 feet up a slim ladder to the top. Unsettled, we made our way back to my aunt and uncle's after that. We never mentioned it to anyone, or at least I never did. Thinking back on it, 15 years later, we definitely should have said something. I've tried looking up similar things in the area, but haven't had any luck. We never went back there after finding that horrible scene. I also wouldn't conclude that the house we found or the person that showed up there are in any way related to the tower stand. That's just how our story began. Something messed with our car in the woods. This happened to me when I was 17, around the time when most of my friends were just getting their driver's license. We all had that rush for cars back then, so it was quite common for us to skip school and go for a ride out of town. The city where I live is surrounded by forests and 2 mountains, so we basically had a lot of places to go and chill. One day my friend was very excited to show us a place that he found about online, possibly here on Reddit, for which people said was quite odd. We looked it up and apparently it had a reputation for being a paranormal site. Being the typical group of teens, we collectively agreed to check it out ASAP, including me, who more or less believes in spiritual stuff. Going up the mountain, we were listening to the radio until we lost the station to static, which for obvious reasons is what the radio does when you go deep into the woods. This entire experience is happening during a summer night, so we were feeling pretty careless and as excited as a person can be, having no music to listen to. We started talking and discussing our expectation for this place, with most of us having no expectations at all. Our conversation was suddenly interrupted by the loud static coming from the radio that we turned off just a few minutes ago. We were all a bit startled, but still nothing out of the ordinary. It happened again a few minutes later. We all looked at the radio. It was still off. We quickly dismissed this as something that radios do for some reason, and again didn't pay much attention. The third time that it happened, the driver hit the brakes and stopped the car. He turned to us and yelled, "Fuck me, did you hear that? What was that?" Claiming that he heard a voice this time. None of us heard anything except static. The driver said he has had enough and switched the engine off. So there is no possible way for anything, including the radio, to be working. We sat like that for a while in pitch black, for there were no city lights around us and the forest had covered all other light sources like stars, etc. You couldn't distinguish a night sky. That's how dark it was. The light indicating the radio turned on, and soon after the static came. I could tell we were all feeling a bit anxious by then. Through the static came a female voice singing, and it was very silent. For a second it got louder, then fell back to silent again and then vanished. But even weirder, the static vanished too. Once we switched the car back on and turned the headlights on too, we observed what seemed to be smudges of fingers across the fucking windshield. We didn't turn the car around immediately, but I could tell that we all just wanted to leave. We stopped further up on a hill, took some pictures of the Milky Way, and went home afterwards. Ever since, we speculate about what the fuck happened to the radio and windshield that night. My friends went 2 more times without me to the same place, recording the same, including feeling a small push once the car was off.